Gross. Why would I want to use an ancient AT-4 rocket launcher when there's all these new fancy anti-armor options like the Javelin and Carl Gustaf recoilless rifle? Why does the US military even bother with this launcher anymore? While it's often casually referred to as an anti-tank weapon, the AT-4 was never really rated to go head-to-head against an enemy main battle tank in the first place. So what's its purpose on the battlefield? In this episode, I want to explain exactly some of the new upgraded features for the AT-4 and why it's actually a really critical part of the basic infantry platoon doctrine. Quick side note, it's incredible to see how many civilians own one of these and how many are bought in buyback programs, so please make sure you share this video with your friend of yours down the street who owns an AT-4. I don't want anyone out there operating it without fully understanding it. So the AT-4 84mm rocket launcher is the key anti-armor weapon for any modern on-the-go infantry squad. It's been around since the late 1980s, which was about the last time that we went back to the drawing board to replace the M72 law. There are some huge positives with this weapon. The reduced backblast with the AT4-Confined Space version isn't nearly as serious as your other anti-tank weapons. Not saying you should go out there and not check if anyone is behind you before you fire it, but there is definitely less of a chance of turning the whole squad behind you into a piece of toast from the backblast. The trade-off here though is a lower muzzle velocity, which gives the rocket a more pronounced drop-off. So when you're using the confined space version, it has a trajectory that's a little different. The speed won't change the effectiveness of the warhead though. So the AT-4 can be fired from the prone, unlike the Carl Gustaf. This might not sound like a big deal until your squad leader pulls you to the side and says, hey, can you go over there and expose yourself to as much enemy fire as possible by either crouching or standing when firing the AT-4, but no laying down. So it's a nice feature to be able to fire it from the prone. As seen in the Army Field Manual on the AT-4, soldiers need to lay down with their legs at like a 90-degree angle from the direction that they're going to fire it in order to do this safely. It's also advised in the FM to not really do this during training, but to only really do it during a combat firing position only. The MAAWS, on the other hand, can injure out to about 75 meters behind where you fired it. That's basically firing a weapon in both directions at that point and just hoping the other side gets more hurt by the explosion than your own team. I'm exaggerating, of course. The new version, AT4-CS, uses a saltwater countermass that's packed into the launcher tube, and it's meant to eat up and absorb that backblast while also slowing down the dangerous pressure wave. The weapon system is 3 feet long and weighs 15 pounds, so it can be easily carried as a secondary weapon. The max range is 300 meters. Wow, amazing, what a coincidence. That's exactly 20.3 kilometers closer than I'd ever want to be to an enemy armor position in my entire life. A point of clarification here, as these weapon systems evolve, these numbers are changing, so the original AT-4 was only good out to about 300 meters, but they have a new version called the AT-4 Extended Range, which Saab Force Dynamics says is effective out to 600 meters now. Which brings us to the next point. The AT-4 is not meant to go head-to-head with a main battle tank like the T-90 because its armor is too thick. Originally, the AT-4 was meant to go up against sides of main battle tank armor of its time back in the 1980s, but today it would be ineffective in this way. It can, however, knock the tracks off a tank, and it's very effective against a lesser armored vehicle like the BMP. It had to find a way to adapt and overcome the new challenges on a modern battlefield. The launcher's main purpose today has been to be used against fortified enemy positions that are in a building or hiding behind cover on a mountain. So the AT-4 is actually primarily used as an anti-personnel weapon. It remains useful and relevant in its new role of routing fortified enemy infantry positions. When the 5.56 or even the 7.62 isn't enough to dislodge the enemy, then it's nice to know your squad has an ace in the hole with the AT-4. So originally it was made by the Swedish, specifically the brainchild of Fornad Fabrinsky, I definitely pronounced that correctly, which is basically like the Swedish version of DARPA over here in the US. If that analogy doesn't make any sense, then take solace in the fact that I don't know what an analogy is. Basically, the US Army was in the market to dump the Vietnam-era M72 law, so the FFV, that word that I pronounced correctly earlier, offered the AT-4 as a high-power, long-range upgrade. The AT-4 barrel doesn't need to be able to handle a massive pressure spike when fired, since it's a completely disposable gun. You just shoot it and then you throw it away. There might be some talk in the comments at this point about whether or not the AT-4 is actually a rocket launcher, or if it's a recoilless rifle. If you're a FUD like me, then you don't want to make a mistake like that in the distinction. I've seen it described and classified as both all over the internet, and I've heard it called a rocket launcher by all my senior NCOs, and the official US Army manual on shoulder-fired munitions mentions that the AT-4 is similar to a recoilless rifle, while also mentioning that it shoots rockets. So at this point, if it quacks like a rocket launching duck, then it's probably a rocket launching duck, right? But now we have to turn around and look at some of the potential downsides on this platform. One of those drawbacks being you can only use it once. It's fire and forget. Shoot and no reload. If that isn't the biggest case of planned obsolescence I've ever heard of. No, but it's actually a strategy. The thinking here is that it's lightweight enough for each infantry squad to carry around. So this is actually the positive side of it being disposable. You can easily toss several in the back or on top of a vehicle and bring one 15-pound AT-4 on patrol with you where the vehicles can't reach. Shoot one off and it costs the taxpayers roughly $1,400. Guess how much a Javelin anti-tank system weighs? No. Guess how much a Javelin anti-tank system costs to fire? It's 50 pounds to lug around, and each rocket from a Javelin costs $78,000. This is why the US military still uses the AT-4 and continues to invest more in their use. This gives a line infantry platoon the combined firepower of 4 84mm rockets. Speaking of the 84mm rocket, they come in all different flavors, including the high explosive dual purpose. We hear about HEDP, but we don't often take the time to look up what it actually means. This type of munition has two purposes. You can set it to detonate on impact or slightly after impact. This will depend on the type of nose cap used. So the HEDP round can be manipulated with a skilled shooter to skip off the ground and then airburst a few seconds later. It can also go through a wall and explode inside the room instead of on the outside of the wall. Then you've got the HP warhead, high penetration, which is rated to go through 23.6 inches of armor. The AT-4 fires at 290 meters per second and hits its target in less than a second if it's at 250 meters range. So my understanding is the FFV was purchased by Saab Bofors Dynamics and continued to create the AT-4. The weapon actually kicked off a whole new wave talking about anti-armor weapons. It's interesting to see language change to explain the new capabilities they're able to come up with. The AT-4 was originally marketed with a beyond armor effect, which means it could create a massive overpressure inside a vehicle and set off a light 100 times brighter than the sun, while sending secondary fragments from the warhead into the entry hole. So the hole itself that the AT-4 punches is small, but it sends fragments into the vehicle, it sends a huge concussion wave and light, and it's supposed to basically disable any troops inside of a vehicle, not necessarily meant to disable the vehicle. So that term, after armor, was used to describe the effects of the AT-4 because many handheld launchers in the 1960s were failing against their armored targets, like the Law. Sometimes when something isn't broken, don't fix it. It doesn't mean you can't stop improving it. And this is exactly what the industry has been doing with each iteration of the AT-4. It's changed a bunch since I was even in. Its ammunition warheads and new optics continue to upgrade it into our modern battlefield day and age. That's all I've got. I'm your host, Chris Cappy. Please remember to like the video and subscribe to the channel to be a part of the military conversation. And remember to share this video with someone that you know who might be interested in the AT-4. Task and Purpose out.